Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." In Spanish, the way to say I am is yo soy. Modern Western weaklings, otherwise known as NPCs, affirm their pride by declaring, "I think, therefore I soy." Speaking of NPCs, I was discussing the subject of people who have no internal monologue. I think it's called aphantasia. If you don't know what that is, you can take a look at it here as someone is interviewing a person with it.
I found out a few days ago that not everyone has the ability to speak in their brain, and the first person that I asked if they could do it was her, and turns out she can't. So I asked a bunch of people to ask me questions so I could ask her so she could try to make light of this wild situation. So if you look, I could look at myself in the mirror, talk in my head without opening my mouth. You physically can't do that.
No.
And what would happen if you tried to do that?
I have tried to do that since learning that an internal monologue exists, and I end up speaking out loud to myself. So most of my conversations are out loud.
I feel like this information to the people that can think in their head is a lot more exciting news. I've talked to a few people that can't do this, and they seem less enthused as the people that do have this internal monologue.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yep. I'm very confused as to why people are so perplexed.
All right, so
it.
The probably most requested question was, how do you read? When I read, I hear the words in my head. I don't know how you could possibly read without not hearing the words.
When I read, I can see the sentence structure. In my head, every sentence has a shape, so you can see the shape of the sentence. And then also keywords will pop out, and I can file those away into my concept map. So at the end of reading something, I can have a concept map of the main topics that I read about. And I tend to move my lips when I read. So essentially I'm saying it out loud, but it's just not audible.
So do you visualize the setting when you're reading a book?
No, it's not images. It's just the words.
So do you like reading fiction books, where you have to put yourself in a situation?
I never really enjoyed reading.
At all?
I think maybe that's why.
My friend and I were discussing this phenomenon, and she said, "I bet that as this becomes more and more common, they'll turn it around and accuse normal people of being the dysfunctional ones. They'll probably describe the still small voice that we think of as a conscience as hearing schizophrenic voices in our head." And right on cue, what I thought was satire turned into reality as I read. What's more scary than the inherent dehumanization of the NPC meme is the alt-right demonizing the left for lacking an inner monologue. As if the fact that we don't hear voices in our head telling us what to do or think is somehow a negative, undesirable characteristic. Bragging about their inner monologues, not realizing it makes them look like crazy people. My sides. So the premise of the NPC insult is that liberals lack inner monologues. Someone tell them that you're not supposed to hear voices in your head. At any rate, just as my friend predicted, they turn their handicap into a badge of pride, not understanding that if you don't have the still small voice of conscience, if you don't have a rich interior world, you're not self-directed. Instead of you guiding yourself from within, you're being led and guided from without. Instead of a conscience, you have social media telling you what to do, what to think, what values you should have. French social scientist Gabriel Tarde worried about this as early as the 1880s. He noticed that mass media was having a deleterious effect on the populace. Instead of sharing their own anecdotes or impressions, people increasingly used newspaper articles as the basis for their small talk. He wrote, "We shall never know and can never imagine to what degree newspapers have transformed, both enriched and leveled, unified in space and diversified in time, the conversations of individuals, even those who do not read papers, but who, talking to those who do, are forced to follow the grooves of their borrowed thoughts. One pen suffices to set off 1,000,000 tongues." He was worried at the effect of mass media and how it created what never existed before, unanimity of thought. Instead of being an original individual, people were turning into products of mass culture. Like products mass-produced on an assembly line, individuals are not encouraged to go within for answers, but to get boilerplate answers and opinions from electronic devices, which are now essentially extensions of the human neurological system. Kids are plugged in and cut off from themselves. There's an article entitled, "Kids Are Losing Their Empathy, and Technology Has a Lot to Do with It." In the article we read, "Among the compelling evidence that Dr. Michelle Borba presents is University of Michigan research that suggests today's college students are 40% less empathetic compared to their peers 30 years ago. Meanwhile, the levels of narcissism have increased by 58%. An educational psychologist and parenting expert, Borba sees these damning trends in the rise of bullying in schools and the massive popularity of the selfie among other cultural phenomena. This was, of course, even before the COVID thing. Kids were becoming technologically autistic, and it was showing up in social anxiety disorder and a whole host of different pathologies. Throw on top of that the new mask thing, and you start to realize the damage being done to these kids. In the book Friendship, Lydia Denworth studies the underpinnings of harmonious relationships and spends a great deal of time on the neuroscience behind it and how brain development is thrown off if little kids don't have access to human faces. She writes of one study with macaques saying, "From birth, the monkeys were not exposed to a face, human or non-human. Their caregivers wore welding masks when interacting with the young monkeys. For the record, the animals had lots of attention, activity, and toys. They were well nourished and lovingly bottle-fed as infants. The only thing their world lacked was faces." Using fMRI, Livingstone showed in 2017 that if the monkeys had zero experience of looking at faces, the parts of their brains that should have been dedicated to that task did not develop the skill. Thankfully, however, human babies are not raised by people wearing welding masks and do in fact see faces from the beginning. Of course, the book was written before COVID. The author had no idea that shortly after the book's publication, children all over the world would be thrust into history's largest Stanford prison experiment. The point is, an inhuman system is not designed to turn out humans. It's engineered to create something else. In the 1950s, they called this mass man, and philosophers like Gabriel Marcel worried about it in books like Man Against Mass Society. In Prometheus and Atlas, Jason Rezagorjani writes, "Like the Cartesian wax, any being is taken to be dissolvable into homogeneous elementary solids that function something like building blocks, each sufficiently lacking in character so as to be suitable for any manner of lawful or systematic construction. One can make anything out of these simple parts by rearranging them." With the phrase "each building block lacking in character," I was reminded how when schools first started in America, they weren't seen as vocational. Their main function was character formation. We got rid of that. Now schools see their job as churning out characterless building blocks, like stem cells in the human body, except those stem cells are for the body politic. In the human body, stem cells start out as blank, generic. Only later are they converted into heart cells or brain cells or leg cells. Human beings are basically treated as stem cells to be deployed wherever they're needed later on in society. So the school system's whole goal is to crush out the miracle of human personality and to make each and every pupil who passes through their doors into blank, faceless, characterless NPCs, the raw material for the oligarchs to later mold into whatever shape they want. Our freedoms are under attack, yet the loss of freedom is not inevitable. America can be saved, and an informed citizenry can and will make the difference. Join us weekly for episodes of Beyond the Cover, and check out our print magazine too at thenewamerican.com.